Hello, this is Christina Yonkman, and I am going to share with you my case study, Copyright and the Computer Regulations Governing Technology. So in section 1, we are going to establish the facts that we know, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about St. Regis Schools. Mr. Sample is a third-year principal there. They have K through 8th grade students, and they have approximately 420 students. Mrs. Lynn is a first year as the full-time computer library assistant because their full-time staff retired and that position did not fill. So the school had to file a special waiver to fill that position with a part-time assistant. Mrs. Williams is an experienced third grade teacher who has started at St. Regis her first year and she's been there a while. And Mrs. Brandon is a new third grade teacher and she is at St. Regis with 3 years of experience at another school. And then we will also hear about Mrs. Evans, our PTA president. So St. Regis is a rural school within 25 miles of a larger city. The town has 2 grocery stores, a drugstore, and a few small businesses. When students become freshmen and enter high school, they are bused to the nearby city to attend school. St. Regis has 2 teachers per grade level and only 2 special education teachers. They have a very small budget that is supplemented by 2 major fundraising events that are sponsored by our PTO. So we're going to dig in a little bit and learn about each of the people that are in this case study. We're going to start with Mrs. Lynn. She is our computer library assistant. She has ordered new computer software programs for the computers in the lab, and there are approximately 20 computers in the lab that the PTO has been able to purchase, and then they purchase software for those programs. She has cataloged the software with other emerging technology items. She stores in the computer lab next to the library for teacher and student use. She develops a schedule so that each teacher can use the technology software. However, after having such a large demand for the software, and some teachers have been asking her, 4 months later, she made several copies of the program on flash drives for classroom use. And then she distributed those flash drives to both the third grade teachers. Mrs. Evans is our PTO president. She actually helped purchase the new technology for the software and helps with community fundraisers. She helped make the copies, which also violated copy laws. And she praised Mrs. Lynn for helping stretch the PTA dollars. Mrs. Williams is a veteran third grade teacher, and she was very happy to receive the copied programs after using the library set for the 4 months. She thanked Mrs. Lynn for her willingness to supply copies to each teacher and to use in the classroom. However, Mrs. Brandon, one of the new third grade teachers, was not as excited. She was very appreciative, but very concerned about copyright policies. She did not accept the copies for her classroom, and she explained that her prior school would not allow commercial programs to be copied, and this really bothered her. At the end of the day, she stopped by the principal's office with her copyright law violation concern. So now we're going to move on to myself, Mr. Sample, a third-year principal at St. Regis. In the principal's office, I listened to Mrs. Brandon's concerns about the copyright laws. And however, I did not really respond or communicate suggestions to Mrs. Brandon. I did not take the lead and question Mrs. Williams, the other third grade teacher. I did take the lead and approach Mrs. Lynn for clarification on copying the programs. When I stopped by the library, I really did not promote the well-being of Mrs. Brandon because Mrs. Lynn did question what her problem was and said several inappropriate things about Mrs. Lynn, which made her feel very uncomfortable. I used caution about the well-being of Mrs. Lynn when I told her that she was in violation of the copyright policies. And I did not support the community or take the lead and approach Mrs. Evans, the PTA president, when Mrs. Lynn mentioned her involvement. I also did not take the lead and collect the copies myself, which is a legal and ethical concern. Okay, we're going to move on to section 2. We are going to look at any illegal or ethical issues here. So first of all, we're going to start with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans. They both violated the copyright law when they made multiple copies of the software that was purchased for use in the library to use in individual classrooms. Because the copyright and fair law does not allow copying a computer program purchased for use in one department or school for use in another department or school, and this is a copyright infringement. There is a definite ethical concern with three people, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Evans, and Mrs. Williams, because they all three were very excited about the extra copies of the program. No person was physically harmed here during this copyright violation. However, if we had to label their action as harming, the closest tort law that I could find would be against Mrs. Brandon, and that would be intentional infliction of emotional distress, just because due to her comments that were being made to and about her and dismissing her belief that it was unethical and that she didn't want any part of it. If those rude comments continued, it could be considered harassment. A breach of contract with the software company was committed since more copies were made and being used in classrooms instead of the computer lab where they were purchased and cataloged. Here, the company is the victim, and there was no discrimination that took place. Continuing on with Mr. Sample, myself, there was lack of immediate support and feedback to Mrs. Brandon, and he did not contribute to her well-being. Informing Mrs. Lynn that she violated the copyright law, but I did approach her with a compliment first, so I was considering her well-being and trying to approach her very delicately. I did not take the lead and discard the copies myself, which could affect the future success of the school. And if Mrs. Lynn doesn't respond to my request, the school could face violation charges or fines. And this could affect the well-being and success of all stakeholders, students and staff, if they do not have access to technology when needed. In addition, I did not take the lead and approach Mrs. Evans about the copyright law, even when she was involved. And part of that would have been concern that the PTO may not want to consider future fundraising or helping with funding for the school. But this did show lack of leadership and could possibly affect the well-being of students and staff in the future. Okay, let's move on to section 3. We are going to talk about exactly what happened, and I have a statement here. So I say that staff and the PTO president at St. Regis School has violated the copyright and fair use law, and lack of leadership could affect the well-being of all stakeholders, as well as the future technology and financial management of the district. So let's look in section 4. We're going to look at the known facts and the unknown facts, and I just shared with you a list of multiple facts. So now I'm going to talk about what are we missing? What do we not know about this case study? So we're going to start with people first. The case study did mention that copies were given to all grade levels. So we don't know anything about the 2nd and 4th grade teachers that they mentioned. It also talked about Mr. Sample wanting to maintain a good relationship with resistant teachers and longtime residents. We don't know anything about who those resistant teachers are or who those residents are. He also talks about wanting to have a vision for the school, and we don't know what that vision is. We talk about frequent computer lab users and how this affected them, but we do not know who those users exactly are. The case study also suggested that several teachers requested copies. The 2 that we were familiar with were the 3rd grade teachers, so we're not real sure about the other copies. Mrs. Brandon mentions that her former superintendent was very cautious about copyright laws, and we do not know anything about who her superintendent is. And it also talked about PTA officers helping with fundraising, and we do not know who any of them are beyond Mrs. Evans. As far as the place, we know that the school is within a large city 25 miles away. We don't know what the name of that city is or anything about it, besides our students attend high school there. The case study mentioned several small businesses in town, but we do not know what those businesses are. And Mrs. Brandon also talked about her former school north of the current school, and we do not know what that school is. As far as programs, We do not know what the computer software name or publisher is. We really don't even know what the school budget is. It talked about it being small, but we don't know what it is as far as overall budget or individual technology budget. We know that the PTO holds 2 fundraisers, but we don't know what those profits bring in. They also talk about doing an end of the year survey for teachers and participants so that they know what kind of software technology they want to purchase, but we don't know what those questions on that survey entail. The case study mentioned using the software for independent center activities in other classrooms. We don't know what all those activities or centers involve, or even for sure how many and what classrooms. At this point, we don't even know the cost of the software and how much it costs per copy. And we also don't know exactly how many flash drives. We know I saw a pile there, but we don't know exactly how many flash drives have been handed out and exactly where they all are. And then last, we do not know if the district has a technology plan that consists of an AUP or any type of staff or student training. And I am guessing in a school this small, they don't have a large technology department, but that is something that we're just not real sure. Okay, moving on to section 5, we are going to look at the damage to stakeholders and the community. So we're going to start with staff. Definitely staff was affected by this because it affects their classroom lesson plans and having to go back to the library to use the computers instead of being able to use the program in the classroom. It also affects their district and building morale. This can affect the Board of Education in a way where they may question the district policy. It can also affect the Board of Education if it comes down to budgeting and what they need to do to help either replace the programs or look at future purchases. It will affect the students, hopefully just short term as far as having to go back to that schedule in the library. They are not going to have access to it daily like they are used to in their classroom. But it can also affect if not every grade level is able to use it as Mrs. Lynn was hoping. Our case study definitely affects the PTO because they are very supportive of the school. However, we have to be very delicate as we talk with them because we don't want to make them not ever want to help the school again or cut our funding. Parents will be involved because obviously it affects their students, and it can also affect possibly financial as far as them having to either provide funding or help with more fundraisers. It affects our administration in a way that, of course, myself, I feel like I have been unethical with this situation, and my supervisor and those above me are also getting involved with the case study. It can affect community businesses due to the fundraising efforts, and also just if the school or parents have to put out more money, they may actually have a loss of income at the local businesses, which in turn also affects the taxpayers, and that comes clear back to the whole financial end of it. And then lastly, we have our software company. They definitely have a financial loss if schools continue to make copies instead of purchasing them through their company. Okay, section 6, we are going to talk about what some of our options are as far as plans. And I considered several different things, and I put mine into 4 different possibilities. So the first idea was I could basically, as the principal, do nothing. This would be the easy way to go, but it would be very unethical and could get our school into legal trouble. The second option would be I need to take the lead, and I need to meet with those individual stakeholders, being very cautious and how I go about doing that, and then destroying of the program so that we are not continuing infringement of that copyright law. So again, I would meet with the computer assistant and the PTO president. I would consult the contract that we have with the software program just to see exactly what the contract says. If needed, I would contact the school technology department. I would notify all the teachers that have the copies. With the help of Mrs. Lynn, and the teachers, I would gather the original and copies of the software program. I would gather the pile of flash drives by the library computer, and I would contact my supervisor, because it is important that either in this case, it's probably the superintendent, or in a larger district, it might be an assistant superintendent or a director. It's important to keep them in the loop through this whole case study. Okay, my third option would be to use all the information from my take the lead option, but also implement a school technology mission and vision where I am going to include more stakeholders with the community. And so with the assistance of personnel, we could possibly have to contact our school attorney and the Board of Education president to let them know what has happened. I would want to provide ongoing training for continuous improvement of staff, students, and our PTO group. We would need to notify the financial and budgeting department, because purchasing more software is going to affect that department. I would notify or answer questions from students as needed when they start to question why they can't access their programs daily in their classroom anymore. I would also meet with parents and answer any questions as needed when they start to question the situation. I would address any concerns from community members or possibly businesses. And I would consider other means of funding to provide equitable funding in this situation. And that might be having to reallocate funds. That could be additional fundraising efforts. And so we would just have to take a look at what would be in the best interest of our school. My fourth option for a plan would be to reach out and contact the software company. This would be the most drastic plan and would also have legal ramifications to it. So before I decide exactly which plan I want to move forward with, there are a multiple number of questions that I need to answer or at least consider. So I want to go through those with you. First of all, we need to consider, has a law been broken? And yes, we know there has been a copyright infringement and the copyright law has been broken. Has anyone been harmed? Physically, no. Even emotionally, no, unless our negative words from Mrs. Lynn towards Mrs. Brandon continue. Has a school policy been violated? I am going to say yes, not knowing what the school policy is from the case study, but just considering the school districts I've had experience with, I am sure that the school policy AUP has been violated. What additional school policies need to be implemented, and are they fair and equitable for everybody? This would include teachers, staff, students, and possibly community members. Has anyone broken an ethical code of conduct? And yes, I do believe Mr. Sample, myself, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Williams, and Mrs. Evans all have had a ethical code of conduct issue. How can policies be monitored and prevented from happening again? And we would want to take a look at that. How can we include our parents and community members and still support them and include them in our school plan? How can we support and inform staff and students with our plan? How can classroom supplies and curriculum be equally distributed? And again, that kind of goes to the equitable, or is it fair and equitable? We want to make sure everybody has access to the software. And how can we inform the board of our laws, policies, and regulations so that they understand what is allowed and what is not? And then lastly, how do current laws, policies, and regulations affect our school needs? And that would be something that we would look back at our data from our evaluations that we send out or our surveys. So now that we've considered all of these questions, we are going to move into our plan, and we're going to look at pros and cons. So we're going to start with number one, the do nothing plan. The pros there would be this would maintain staff morale because there's not going to be any conflict. This would save negative attention to the school, and it would also allow more classroom access to the computer program. However, some cons would be it is a definite legal risk, there's ethical concerns, It shows poor leadership. It can affect staff morale in a negative way for those that feel awkward, like Mrs. Brandon does. And it also most likely violates school policy and the AUP. If I was to use my second option, which is take the lead and just include those that were directly related, this could, some pros would be it could prevent future violations and liability. It does reinforce the law, and it would be an ethical choice. A con of that would be it could create negative staff morale because some staff may not feel like, as a principal, I am dealing with the situation like I should. It will definitely have some uncomfortable conversations with those involved. It could harm individual staff relationships, not only with myself, but other staff, for example, Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon. And it interferes with classroom learning because now our students are having to move back to their schedule in the lab instead of having it in their individual classrooms. Okay, the pros and cons of if I implement a school technology mission and vision. And this would include providing training and additional funding options. A pro would be it follows school policy. It allows collaboration among staff and the community. It fosters positive student learning. It builds positive relationships with all stakeholders. And it provides unified understanding of what digital citizenship and what the copyright laws are. Cons would be that it disrupts classroom function for a limited amount of time. It's definitely going to be some more uncomfortable conversations with those stakeholders involved. It can be very time consuming. It can cost us more money. It can affect our entire building morale because now people are upset that they have to have additional training. They can't use their software in their classrooms. And there is a great risk that it could not be successful. You know, our additional fundraising options may not work out. We may not have PTO support. Our teachers may get disgruntled. And then lastly, if we contact the software company, this would be an ethical choice and we would be abiding by the law. However, the cons would be it would definitely be a legal liability for the school and community and create negative school morale among all the stakeholders. It would definitely be a financial liability because there may be some fines in addition to having to purchase additional software. And it does not remedy the entire problem because then we have teachers that still don't have access to the software. And so that would be a list of all of our pros and cons. So now we need to take a look at what plan do I want to choose. And as I decided, I chose developing plan number 3. And so before I get deep into the plan, there were some things that I wanted to consider. And these are some things that helped me decide which plan to go with. I referred to our district technology plan. I looked at our student and staff handbooks, and I also dug a little bit into the board policies and the negotiated agreement because before I approach teachers and have those difficult conversations, I want to make sure I'm following all of the agreement and policies there. There were several articles and resources from prior modules regarding copyright laws, fair use laws, and tort liability that I also referred to before making this decision. So, plan number 3 was implementing school technology mission and vision, and this includes all stakeholders. So I'm going to go through my plan, and the immediate action would be I would need to notify my supervisor, who in turn may want me to meet with personnel or possibly involve the district attorney. Next, I would meet with Mrs. Lynn, the library computer assistant, and with her I would have some delicate conversations about what laws were broken and why, and give her some suggestions on what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future and possibly discuss a plan of improvement. Next, I would meet with Mrs. Evans, who is our PTA president. And even though I'm not looking forward to this because I'm concerned about PTA not helping us in the future, I need to explain to her my ethical decision and why it needs to be addressed. With the help of Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans, we would destroy all copies made and get rid of the flash drives. And then I would help secure the computer software, the original computer software in the lab, and ask Mrs. Lynn to create an equal schedule again so that all teachers and students had access to that software. Then I would follow up with Mrs. Brandon and provide positive feedback, let her know that things are being handled and that I appreciate her honesty and her ethical stance with this situation. Then I would meet with Mrs. Williams because she was the other third grade teacher who took the software copies. She was very happy about it and praised Mrs. Lynn for doing that. I would explain to her why and what law has been broken and what we can do to help prevent this in the future, and possibly also discuss a plan of improvement with her. And then lastly, I would notify any remaining staff that was involved so that they were aware of the change with our technology software. Okay, after this immediate action was taken, I would move to a little bit later, maybe within the next month. I would look at educating students as necessary. I know there's going to be questions that arise, and I would answer those. I would look at meeting with our technology department and seeing what we can come up with as far as a plan for the future. We definitely need to look at our AUP and update it if we have one. If our school does not have one, we would definitely want to create one because it's really important that teachers and students understand the acceptable use policy. We would update our future technology purchasing guidelines, possibly looking at maybe running that through the technology department. And I know this is a small school. This is probably easier in a larger school, but having that technology department be the one that actually puts those on the computers and lets teachers know what is available and when and how they can use that. Next, I would answer any questions that are by the Board of Education because they're going to have some questions and also want to be involved in our technology guidelines. And then lastly, I would meet with our entire PTO, not just Mrs. Evans, and explain the situation and thank them for their support and their help and let them know that I am very willing to work with them in the future and that we'll do whatever we can to help with their fundraising efforts. So after that, I'm looking at longer range planning. Before the end of this current school year, I thought it would be a good idea if our technology department and staff could plan a technology fair for the community and maybe have some auction items there with PTO to help raise some additional funds. And at the technology fair, then this is an informative fair with booths that explain different technology. We can talk about the laws, we can talk about AUPs, we can talk about the Fair Use Act, just have a variety of things for both staff, students, and community. We would want to survey the fair attendees to see what they would like to see in the future or what they learned from it and what they liked about the fair. And we would evaluate that data. And then we would use those fair funds to purchase additional software. So we would use the funding from the auction items or any other possible concession stands or whatever else was held at the fair. And then other staff, student, and PTO trainings would be scheduled regarding technology and Fair Use Act. And then in the future, after this year, we would continue that training for staff, student, and the PTO. We would provide continuous walkthrough supervisions for myself with teachers. And we would like to see about possibly holding an annual community technology fair and including other community businesses, or maybe even looking at that larger city that's less than about 25 miles from us to continue education and basically educating all stakeholders involved. Okay, so that is my detailed plan. Now it's time to implement it. And I just went through all the details. So the implementation part would be to start with step one. And step one of that plan was to meet with my supervisor and let them know what was going on. I would definitely notify all stakeholders involved and have those conversations, whether they are difficult or not. I would consider those conversations and be very delicate with those and professional about it. Then continuing on with implementing that plan, I would need to consider what may happen. What could happen that this plan may not work? And there were lots of things that I came up with here. First of all, staff may disagree with a plan of improvement. They may disagree that they did anything wrong. And so then that's when I would have to possibly involve personnel. Staff may dislike the computer lab schedule and show their concern with that. And so I would have to reassure them that this is hopefully short term and that we're working on some additional funding. What happens if technology doesn't support the new policies? You know, when you start working with a whole school and community stakeholders, creating policies is very tedious. And so that would just be something that we would have to all work together on. What happens if my supervisor questions my leadership skills? And, you know, looking at this whole case study, I definitely did not follow through ethically like I should have, and I would take full responsibility for that. What happens if our school does face legal ramifications? What happens if the attorney says, no, we have to notify the company? Then we're looking at those legal ramifications, which also affects our finances. What happens if PTO does not want to help with future fundraising? And that's why it's really important when I approach PTO, how I approach them, and I show my continued support with them. What happens if there's poor attendance at our technology fair? Then we need to consider other types of fundraisers or ways to move our budget around and help with the funding. It's very possible that computer software prices may increase. And so if that happens, you know, then what do we need to do? How are we going to raise more money? And then last, what happens if staff and students are resistant to attending trainings? Even though we know it's necessary, that is a very big possibility that I would need to be prepared for. So with all of those questions in mind, then I would need to look at a plan B, because what happens if my plan doesn't work? And what happens if plan B doesn't work? Maybe there's a plan C. So I would definitely want to involve the personnel department and the school's attorney if needed, and this would be the worst case scenario. Consider other types of fundraisers to help supplement the budget. We could possibly apply for grants to help supplement the budget. We could create a building technology committee, which would include staff, students, and community stakeholders. We would definitely want to make sure we include parents in that. We would have current staff possibly get trained to provide building technology training about copyright laws. Sometimes when you have a train the trainer, that staff is more willing to provide the training, and then the staff that they're training is more willing to accept it because it's coming from one of their peers. And then I would definitely have a training for the Board of Education about technology policies and laws so that they understand why we are going through all of the policies and guidelines that we are. Okay, section 10, I want to explain the implementation part and how it correlates to the standard. This case study has helped me understand PLO 6, the operations and management. It really helped me dig deeper into copyright laws and how lack of leadership can affect an entire school community and the well-being of students and staff. It's really important that communication happens when approaching a breach of contract and helping staff understand the district policies and regulations. In addition, this standard also provides me to look at data-informed and equitable school resource plans and how to apply them to benefit all stakeholders involved. The relevancy of this case study, this module has helped me understand the importance of communication and training in regards to technology, laws, and district policies. Doing this case study really made me think in detail what like our district policy is and what we could adjust to ensure a copyright infringement doesn't happen in our district in the future. And by reviewing the laws and implementing district policy, we help promote the well-being of our students and staff. And last, we have our reflection. So as a building leader, I need to ensure that our building implements laws, policies, and regulations regarding copyright and technology. I will advocate for a data-driven and equitable plan that supports our school improvement and positive development of students. And with these two things regarding technology and copyright laws, this will help me promote the well-being of our staff and students. And last, I have my references. I use the reference from this module along with several other references from the copyright module and also the tort law module. Thank you. I appreciate your attention.